The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of downtown reeked of motor oil and blood. Sarah Chen should have been sitting in the Crystal Room restaurant right now, smiling politely at whatever boring heir her father had handpicked for her arranged marriage. Instead, she knelt beside a leather-clad stranger whose Harley had skidded across 3 lanes of traffic. "Don't call 911, he gasped, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Blood seeped through his torn jacket, but his eyes held an intensity that made her heart race. "They can't know I'm here." What Sarah didn't know was that Jake Morrison wasn't just any Hells Angels biker. For 2 years, he'd been deep undercover, building a case against the Chen family's money laundering operation. The same operation that funded her privileged life, the same operation her father would kill to protect. As sirens wailed in the distance, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He was about to blow his cover for a woman whose father he'd sworn to destroy. But why was the mob princess helping him instead of running? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah stared into those piercing blue eyes, her designer dress already stained with grease from the warehouse floor. She should have kept driving when she saw the motorcycle accident, should have called 911 like any normal person. Instead, something about his desperate expression had compelled her to pull over. "The sirens aren't for you," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "I called them before I came in here." Jake's jaw clenched. 2 years of careful planning, of earning the trust of the Hells Angels chapter that did business with Victor Chen, and now it might all crumble because of a good Samaritan with kind eyes and a guilty conscience. "You need to leave," he said through gritted teeth, trying to sit up. Pain shot through his ribs, and he suspected at least 2 were broken. "This isn't a safe place for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. She'd heard that phrase her entire life, usually followed by explanations about her sheltered upbringing, her father's expectations, her duty to the family. "What exactly do you think you know about me?" Jake studied her face in the dim light filtering through the warehouse's broken windows. Designer clothes, perfect makeup despite the chaos, manicured nails now dirty from helping him. She screamed privilege, but there was something else, a spark of defiance he hadn't expected. "I know you drive a car worth more than most people's houses," he said. "I know you should be running from a place like this, not playing nurse to a stranger." Sarah's phone buzzed insistently, the 3rd call from her father in 10 minutes. She'd already missed the dinner reservation, and Victor Chen didn't tolerate tardiness, especially when it came to his carefully orchestrated business arrangements disguised as social meetings. "Maybe I'm tired of doing what I should do," she said, surprising herself with the admission. She pulled off her silk scarf and pressed it against the worst of his wounds. "What happened to you?" Jake's mind raced. The deal had gone wrong. Chen's men had grown suspicious when Jake asked too many questions about their shipping routes. He'd barely escaped the warehouse meeting before bullets started flying, crashing his bike in his haste to get away. Now Chen's daughter was here, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the warehouse's stench. "Wrong place, wrong time," he said carefully. "Look, princess." "Sarah," she corrected sharply. "And I'm not a princess." Despite the pain, Jake almost smiled. The fire in her voice suggested otherwise, but not in the way he'd expected. This wasn't entitled anger. It was something deeper, more frustrated. The sirens grew louder. Soon the place would be crawling with paramedics, police, and questions Jake couldn't answer without blowing his cover. Worse, if word got back to Chen that his daughter had been found helping a Hells Angels member. "You need to go," Jake said urgently, struggling to his feet. "Before they get here. If anyone sees you—" "What? My father will be angry?" Sarah stood too, steadying him when he swayed. "He's already furious. I was supposed to meet my potential future husband tonight. Some banker's son who probably thinks the most dangerous thing in the world is a market downturn." Her phone rang again. This time, Jake could see the contact name, Father. Even he recognized Victor Chen's distinctive ringtone. He'd heard it enough times during meetings over the past 2 years. "Answer it," Jake said quietly. An idea was forming, dangerous but necessary. "Tell him you had car trouble. Tell him you'll reschedule." Sarah looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you care what I tell my father?" "Because your father is a criminal, and I'm going to bring him down," Jake thought. "Because this chance encounter might be exactly the break I've been waiting for." Instead, he said, "Because I have a feeling we're going to see each other again." The marble floors of the Ashford estate gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Victoria made her way down the grand staircase, her heels clicking with each measured step. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a powder blue Chanel dress that spoke of refinement without trying too hard, the kind of dress that said she took this meeting seriously, even though every fiber of her being rebelled against it. Her father waited in the foyer, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. Richard Ashford commanded attention wherever he went, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom Italian suit impeccable. At 62, he still possessed the sharp intensity that had built their family fortune, though Victoria had learned not to ask too many questions about the early days of his business empire. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Remember, the Blackwood family has been in shipping for 3 generations. Marcus is a good match, stable, wealthy, and most importantly, discreet about business matters." Victoria nodded, swallowing the bitter taste in her mouth. She'd researched Marcus Blackwood thoroughly. Harvard MBA, inherited wealth, reputation for being ruthlessly efficient in both business and personal relationships. On paper, he was perfect. In reality, the thought of spending her life with him made her feel like she was suffocating. "The reservation is at Le Bernardin," her father continued, straightening her pearl necklace with paternal precision. "I've already spoken to Marcus about timing. If things go well today, we could announce the engagement at the charity gala next month." "And if they don't go well?" Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. Richard's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "They will. This union benefits both families, Victoria. Sometimes personal desires must take a back seat to larger responsibilities." The drive through Manhattan felt like a funeral procession. Victoria stared out the tinted windows of her father's Bentley, watching normal people live their normal lives on the sidewalks. A couple laughed as they shared a hot dog from a street vendor. A mother pushed her toddler on a swing in a small park. Simple moments that felt impossibly distant from her gilded cage. As they approached the restaurant, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate Sarah, now living freely in Portland as a graphic designer. The message was a photo of a hiking trail with the caption, "Wish you were here. Adventure calls." Adventure. The word lodged itself in Victoria's chest like a splinter. "We're here," her father announced unnecessarily as the car pulled up to Le Bernardin's elegant entrance. "Marcus should already be inside. Remember, this is important, Victoria. More important than you might realize." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply, but his face had already shifted into his business mask. Pleasant, controlled, revealing nothing. Victoria stepped out of the car, the afternoon sun warming her shoulders. She could see through the restaurant's windows to where Marcus Blackwood sat at a corner table, checking his Rolex with the impatience of a man accustomed to punctuality. Everything about him screamed control and expectation. Her feet felt leaden as she approached the entrance, each step carrying her further from any chance at choosing her own path. The maitre d' smiled and gestured toward Marcus's table, but Victoria found herself frozen in the doorway. This was it. Once she sat down, once she smiled and made conversation about their family's business interests and mutual acquaintances, the wheels would be set in motion. Her father had made his expectations clear, and Marcus wasn't the type of man who would take rejection gracefully. He thought about Sarah's text, about the hiking trail and the freedom to choose your own direction. Then she looked at Marcus, who had spotted her and was rising from his chair with a smile that was more calculation than warmth. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear as breaking glass. Victoria turned on her heel and walked straight back to the Bentley, where their driver was still idling at the curb. She knocked on the passenger window. "Mrs. Ashford?" Thomas, who'd been with the family for 15 years, looked confused. "Is everything all right?" "I need you to drive me somewhere else," she said, climbing into the back seat before she could lose her nerve. "And Thomas? Don't call my father for at least an hour." "Where to, miss?" Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for, the address of a community center in Brooklyn where she'd volunteered during college. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was away from here, away from Marcus and his expectations and her father's machinations. "Brooklyn," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just drive toward Brooklyn and I'll figure out the rest." As the Bentley pulled away from Le Bernardin, Victoria caught a glimpse of Marcus through the window, now standing and looking around with obvious irritation. A phone would start ringing soon. First Marcus, then her father. But for the first time in years, Victoria Ashford was making her own choice. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor made Isabella's stomach churn as she paced outside the emergency room. 3 hours had passed since the ambulance arrived, and still no word about the mysterious biker who'd collapsed in her arms. She'd given the nurses a false name, Sarah Mitchell, not wanting to draw attention to herself or field questions about why Harrison Industries' heiress was involved with a bloody stranger. Her phone buzzed incessantly. 17 missed calls from her father, 12 from her assistant, and God knows how many from Richard Pemberton, her intended fiancé. The thought of that insufferable man waiting at Le Bernardin, probably ordering another bottle of wine while checking his Rolex, almost made her smile despite the circumstances. "Miss Mitchell?" A tired-looking doctor emerged from behind the double doors, and Isabella's heart lurched. "Yes. How is he?" She stepped forward, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. "He's stable. Lost a lot of blood, but the knife missed anything vital. Lucky man." The doctor studied her face. "Are you family?" I found him. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. He's asking for you, actually. Kept mumbling something about a guardian angel in a silver dress." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "Room 314, but visiting hours end soon." Isabella's heels clicked against the linoleum as she made her way to the elevator, her hands trembling slightly. Why was she so nervous? She'd done her good deed. Surely she could just peek in, confirm he was fine, and leave. Return to her regularly scheduled life of board meetings and charity galas and marriages arranged for tax benefits. Room 314 was dimly lit, the only sound the steady beeping of monitors. The man from the alley looked different under the harsh fluorescent lights, younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s. Someone had cleaned the blood from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and a strong jawline marred by a fresh bruise. His dark hair was longer than fashion magazines would approve of, and even unconscious. There was something dangerous about him that made her pulse quicken. "You came back." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Isabella jumped, not realizing he'd awakened. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. The doctor said you'll recover." He struggled to sit up slightly, wincing. Most people would have kept walking. Most people aren't stupid enough to walk down dark alleys in evening gowns. She moved closer to his bedside, noting how his eyes tracked her movement. They were an unusual shade of green, intelligent and watchful in a way that made her feel exposed. "What happened to you?" Something flickered across his expression, too quick to interpret. Wrong place, wrong time. Occupational hazard. What kind of occupation involves getting stabbed? The kind your daddy wouldn't approve of, princess. There was no malice in his voice, just stating a fact, but Isabella stiffened. "You don't know anything about my father. Charles Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, philanthropist, art collector, devoted single father since your mother died when you were 12. He paused, studying her reaction. "Supposed to marry Richard Pemberton III tonight, sealing a very profitable merger." The blood drained from Isabella's face. "How do you? Who are you?" "Someone who pays attention." He reached for the water glass on his bedside table, movements careful and deliberate. Question is, why aren't you at Le Bernardin right now, playing the dutiful daughter? Isabella backed toward the door, every instinct screaming danger. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have... Isabella. The way he said her name stopped her cold. Not the formal pronunciation she was used to, but something warmer, more intimate. I'm not going to hurt you. How do you know my real name? I told them I was Sarah Mitchell. A ghost of a smile played at his lips. Like I said, I pay attention. It's my job. What job? But even as she asked, pieces were clicking into place. The way he'd assessed the alley before collapsing, how he knew details about her life that weren't public knowledge, the careful way he spoke, revealing nothing while learning everything. Jake Morrison. And before you ask, yes, that's my real name. He met her eyes steadily. I'm FBI, Isabella, and I've been investigating your father for the past 2 years. The words hit her like physical blows. FBI, investigating, her father. The room spun slightly, and she gripped the doorframe for support. That's impossible. My father runs a legitimate business. He's one of the most respected men in the city. I know the public story. Jake's voice was gentle but uncompromising. The question is, how much do you know about the private one? Isabella's world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew, everything she'd built her identity around, suddenly felt fragile as spun glass. The man she'd saved, the stranger who'd made her feel more alive in one evening than she had in years, was hunting her father. And somehow, impossibly, she wasn't sure which one of them she believed. The antiseptic smell of the emergency room clung to Sophia's designer dress as she paced the waiting area, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. 3 hours had passed since she'd brought the mysterious biker in, and still no word from the doctors. Every time she tried to leave, something pulled her back, a nagging concern that felt foreign and unsettling. Her phone buzzed for the 20th time. Another text from her father, each one more demanding than the last. The Blackwell dinner had been a disaster in her absence, and Victor Castellano's fury was palpable even through the digital medium. She'd have to face him eventually, but not yet. Not until she knew the stranger would be okay. "Miss?" A tired-looking doctor emerged from behind the double doors. "Are you here for the motorcycle accident victim?" Sophia's stomach clenched. "Yes." "How is he?" "Stable. He's conscious now and asking for you. The bullet wound was clean. Missed anything vital. He's lucky you found him when you did." The doctor paused, studying her expensive clothes with curiosity. "Are you family?" Sophia hesitated. What was she exactly? "I'm the one who brought him in." The doctor nodded and led her through a maze of corridors to a private room. Her breath caught when she saw him, awake now, propped up against pillows, his dark hair tousled and those penetrating blue eyes alert. Without the leather jacket, she could see the lean muscle of his chest beneath the hospital gown and something else that made her freeze. A tattoo peeked from beneath the fabric, numbers and symbols that seemed oddly precise, almost military. "You came back." His voice was rough but warm, and when he smiled, something fluttered in her chest. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." She moved closer, noting how his eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that seemed at odds with his injured state. "The doctor said you were lucky." "Lucky doesn't begin to cover it." He studied her face with an unsettling focus. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Cole." "Sophia." She almost added her last name out of habit, then thought better of it. Something about this man made her want to be just Sophia, not Victor Castellano's daughter, not an heiress with obligations and expectations. Sophia. The way he said her name sent warmth through her veins. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman who saves bleeding strangers. Heat crept up her neck. "I'm not in the habit of rescuing people. I was just in the right place at the right time." Marcus's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Where exactly was that right place?" "I'm having trouble remembering how I got to the hospital." Something in his tone made her cautious. You were on Riverside Drive near the docks. Your bike had crashed. She watched his face carefully. You don't remember the accident? It's fuzzy. His fingers drummed against the bedsheet, a nervous gesture that seemed calculated. What were you doing in that part of town? Doesn't seem like your usual neighborhood. The question was casual, but Sophia sensed something deeper behind it. I was taking a drive, needed to clear my head. They stared at each other for a moment, both clearly holding back information. The silence stretched until Marcus winced, shifting position in the bed. You should rest, Sophia said, moving toward the door. I should go anyway. My family will be worried. Wait. Marcus's hand shot out, catching her wrist. His grip was strong, stronger than someone who just lost that much blood should have. Thank you. Really. I owe you my life. The contact sent electricity up her arm. She looked down at his hand, rough, calloused, with a thin white scar across the knuckles. These weren't the hands of a typical biker. They were too disciplined, too controlled. You don't owe me anything, she managed, gently pulling free. Just be careful out there. Whatever you were mixed up in, it's not worth dying for. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, surprise, calculation, or maybe respect. What makes you think I was mixed up in something? People don't usually get shot by accident. The words came out before she could stop them, and she saw his pupils dilate slightly. I mean, you're right. His voice was quiet now, dangerous. They don't. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. This man was more than he appeared, and she was walking into territory she didn't understand. Everything about him screamed danger, from his too observant eyes to the way he seemed to be cataloguing every word she said. I have to go, she said, backing toward the door. Sophia. Her name stopped her at the threshold. Will I see you again? She knew she should say no, should walk away from whatever this was and return to her safe, predictable world. Instead, she found herself nodding, maybe. As she hurried down the hospital corridor, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just crossed a line from which there would be no return. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across Marcus's sleeping face. Isabella had barely moved from the uncomfortable plastic chair beside his bed, her designer dress now wrinkled beyond recognition. She'd ignored 17 missed calls from her father and twice as many text messages from her mother, each one more frantic than the last. A soft knock interrupted her vigil. Dr. Martinez peered around the door, her expression cautiously optimistic. He's stable, she said quietly. The surgery went well. We removed all the fragments, but he'll need time to recover. Are you family? Isabella hesitated. I'm the one who brought him in. Dr. Martinez studied her for a moment, taking in the expensive jewelry and couture fabric. Well, whoever you are, you saved his life. A few more minutes and we might not have been able to help him. After the doctor left, Isabella found herself really looking at Marcus for the first time since the chaos began. Even unconscious, there was something compelling about him. His features were sharp, intelligent, with small scars that spoke of a life lived on the edge. His hands, she noticed, were calloused but clean, working hands, not the soft palms of someone who'd never known real labor. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Vincent calling. Bella, where the hell are you? Her father's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. The Morettis are asking questions. Do you have any idea how this looks? I'm at the hospital, Papa. There was an accident. What kind of accident? Are you hurt? She glanced at Marcus. No, I'm fine. I couldn't leave someone who needed help. There was a long pause. Come home. Now, we'll discuss this when you get here. The line went dead. Isabella stared at the phone, knowing she'd already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The arranged meeting with Alessandro Moretti was supposed to solidify a business partnership that had been years in the making. Her absence hadn't just been rude, it had been a public embarrassment for both families. You should go, she startled. Marcus was awake, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You're supposed to be resting, she said, moving closer to the bed. And you're supposed to be somewhere else. His voice was rough from the anesthesia, but there was something else there too, an underlying sharpness that hadn't been there before. Someone like you doesn't belong in a place like this. Someone like me? He struggled to sit up, wincing. Rich girl playing Good Samaritan. You've done your charity work for the day. Go back to your world. His dismissal stung more than it should have. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. His eyes swept over her dress, her jewelry. I know you're probably missing something important right now. A charity gala, board meeting, another rich boy's birthday party? Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. For your information, I was supposed to be meeting my future husband, a man I've never chosen, never loved, and frankly never wanted to meet. But instead, I'm here, worried about an ungrateful stranger who seems determined to push me away. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Arranged marriage. Welcome to my world, she said bitterly, where everything is decided for you, including who you'll spend the rest of your life with. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. What's your name? She hesitated, then decided honesty couldn't make things worse. Isabella. Isabella. He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. I'm Marcus. I know. I heard the paramedics say it. Why did you stay? It was a fair question, and one she'd been asking herself. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, I made a choice that was completely my own. Maybe because everyone deserves to have someone care whether they live or die. Marcus studied her face, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing more than she intended to show. Your family's going to be worried, he said finally. My family's going to be furious. There's a difference. A muscle in his jaw tightened. What's your last name, Isabella? The question caught her off guard. There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that made her suddenly wary. Why do you want to know? Just curious about the Good Samaritan who saved my life. Isabella stood, smoothing down her wrinkled dress. I should go. You're right about that much. She was almost to the door when he called after her. Isabella. She turned back. Thank you. For staying, for caring whether I lived or died. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Get better, Marcus. Walking out of that hospital room felt like stepping back into a cage she'd briefly escaped. But as the elevator doors closed, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Marcus's hospital room, casting long shadows across the sterile white walls. Elena sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair she'd claimed as her own, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. She'd been there for 3 hours, arriving before visiting hours officially began, sweet-talking the night nurse with coffee and genuine concern. Marcus stirred, his dark eyes opening slowly before focusing on her face. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, despite the obvious pain medication keeping him groggy. You're still here, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Where else would I be? Elena reached for the water cup on his bedside table, offering him the straw. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. He took a careful sip, wincing as he shifted position, though I'm told it was actually a motorcycle versus concrete situation. Elena's stomach clenched with guilt. I'm so sorry. If I hadn't been there, if you hadn't been trying to protect me. Hey, Marcus caught her hand, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. None of this is your fault. Those men were looking for trouble, and they found it. You probably saved my life by getting me here so fast. The warmth of his touch sent electricity up her arm, and Elena found herself studying his face more intently than she should. There was something about Marcus that didn't quite add up, the way he'd handled himself in the fight, the careful way he sometimes chose his words as if he was constantly editing himself. What do you do? She asked suddenly. For work, I mean. You never really said. A flicker of something, caution, fear, crossed his features before he smiled. Construction, mostly. Whatever pays the bills. Not exactly the kind of career your father would approve of for his daughter's friend. The word friend hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. My father doesn't get to approve or disapprove of my choices anymore, doesn't he? Marcus's eyes searched her face. Elena, I've seen the news. I know who you are, who your family is. This thing between us, whatever it is, it's complicated. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed insistently. Vincent's name flashed on the screen, and her heart sank. She'd been dodging his calls since yesterday, knowing the conversation that awaited her. I should take this, she said reluctantly, stepping into the hallway. Elena Marie, where the hell are you? Vincent's voice was tight with controlled anger. You missed the dinner with the Castellanos. Do you have any idea what position that puts me in? I told you I wasn't going through with it, Vincent. We'll discuss your rebellion later. Right now, I need you home. There are developments in the business that require family unity. Something in his tone made Elena's blood run cold. What kind of developments? The kind we don't discuss over phone lines. 1 hour, Elena. Don't make me send someone to collect you. The line went dead, and Elena stared at her phone, her hands trembling. She'd heard that tone before, when competitors needed to be handled, when loose ends required tying up. Vincent only used that voice when lives hung in the balance. She slipped back into Marcus's room, trying to compose her features. He was sitting up straighter now, more alert, and she caught him quickly tucking something under his pillow. Had it been his phone? Everything okay? He asked, though his eyes seemed to catalogue every detail of her expression. I have to go, she said, gathering her purse. Family obligations. Marcus nodded, but she noticed his jaw tighten. Elena, be careful. Men like your father, they don't stay in power by being forgiving. The comment was casual, but something about it struck her as odd. How would a construction worker know anything about the dynamics of power in her father's world? Most people assumed Vincent Delacroix was simply a successful businessman with interests in real estate and hospitality. I'll be fine, she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. The gesture felt natural, intimate, and she saw surprise flicker in his eyes. I'll come back tonight if I can. As she walked toward the elevator, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the polished metal doors. She looked different. Her carefully maintained composure was cracking, revealing someone she didn't quite recognize. A woman who would sit by a stranger's bedside all night, who would defy her father's direct orders, who was apparently capable of feelings that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The elevator dinged softly as it arrived, and Elena stepped inside, unaware that Marcus was already reaching for the phone hidden beneath his pillow, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across a keypad that definitely didn't belong to any construction worker. Behind her, the hospital room filled with tension, as Marcus spoke in low, urgent tones to someone who was very interested in Elena Delacroix's whereabouts and the summons she'd just received from her father. The morning light filtered through the warehouse windows as Isabella sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, watching Marcus methodically clean his gun. His movements were precise, practiced, nothing like the casual way he'd handled the motorcycle or laughed at her jokes the night before. This was Agent Marcus Chen, and the transformation unsettled her more than she cared to admit. How long have you been watching us? She asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since his revelation. Marcus didn't look up from his work. 3 years. Started as a low-level money laundering investigation, but it kept growing. He slid the magazine into place with a sharp click. Your father's operation is more extensive than anyone realized. Isabella wrapped her arms around her knees. 3 years. While she'd been attending charity galas and art classes, completely oblivious, this man had been systematically documenting her family's crimes. The motorcycle accident, was that part of some elaborate plan? No. Marcus finally met her eyes. That was real. Wrong place, wrong time. I was leaving a meeting with an informant when those guys jumped me. He holstered the weapon. Helping me wasn't supposed to happen. But you're using it now. I'm trying to keep you alive." His voice carried an edge of frustration. "Do you understand what your father will do when he finds out you know? When he realizes you helped an FBI agent?" The weight of that reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. She thought of her father's cold calculation when dealing with business problems, the way people who crossed the Moretti family simply disappeared. She'd always assumed it was just intimidation, strategic relocations. But sitting here, seeing the genuine fear in Marcus's eyes, she began to understand the true cost of her family's empire. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "The arranged marriage, it's not just about business alliances. Vincent Torino is laundering money for international arms dealers. Your father wants to expand into weapons trafficking." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. Vincent deals in real estate, legitimate investments." "Isabella," Marcus pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. "Look at these financial records. The wedding isn't just a merger, it's the foundation for bringing military-grade weapons into the country." She stared at the documents, numbers and transactions that painted a picture she didn't want to see. Her marriage would have been the key to legitimizing the entire operation. Every signature she would have made as Vincent's wife, every social connection she would have provided. It all would have facilitated something monstrous. "My father doesn't tell me everything about the business," she whispered. "But this, he wouldn't have hidden something this big from me. Would he?" Marcus's expression softened. "The FBI believes he was protecting you by keeping you separate from the worst of it. Clean hands, clean conscience. But marriage to Torino would have changed that." Isabella stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city sprawled below them, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the dangerous games being played in penthouses and boardrooms above them. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "What happens now? You arrest me as an accessory? Use me to get to him?" "I won't let that happen." Marcus moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "But we need to be smart about this. Your disappearance has already triggered alarm bells. Your father's security team has been searching all night. So I go back, pretend nothing happened, marry Vincent, and help you gather evidence from the inside." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Absolutely not." Marcus turned her around, his hands gripping her shoulders. "It's too dangerous. If they suspect you know anything, then what? I disappear into witness protection? Abandon everything I've ever known?" Her voice cracked. "That's not living, Marcus. That's just existing." He searched her face, and she saw the conflict warring in his dark eyes. The agent who needed to complete his mission, the man who was beginning to care about her more than was safe for either of them. "There might be another way," he said slowly, "but it would mean trusting me completely. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that?" Isabella studied his face, seeing past the stubble and the exhaustion to something deeper. This man had already risked his cover to protect her, had shown her a truth that could destroy her world because he believed she deserved to know. In less than 24 hours, he'd become more real to her than anyone in her carefully constructed life. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "We're going to give your father exactly what he wants. His daughter, safely returned and ready to be a dutiful bride." He looked up at her. "But first, we're going to make sure you're prepared for what comes next." The safe house smelled like stale coffee and old cigarettes. Isabella sat at the kitchen table, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with dried blood, Marcus's blood, while he paced the small living room like a caged animal. The morning light filtering through the drawn blinds cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing the tension lines around his eyes. "Your father's operation is bigger than we initially thought," Marcus said, finally stopping his restless movement. He pulled out a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. "These are surveillance photos from the past 6 months." Isabella's hands trembled as she reached for the first photograph. It showed her father shaking hands with a man she didn't recognize outside their family's shipping warehouse. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago, the same day her father had told her he was meeting with potential, investors for their legitimate import business. "Who is this?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Vincent Moretti. He runs drugs through the port cities from Miami to Boston." Marcus sat down across from her, his voice gentle but firm. "Your father's been laundering money for the Moretti family for over 2 years." The photograph slipped from Isabella's fingers. She thought of all the charity galas, the family dinners where her father spoke passionately about their company's ethical standards, the way he'd always emphasized the importance of integrity in business. Had it all been lies? "That doesn't prove anything," she said weakly. Maybe he didn't know who this Moretti person really was. Marcus pulled out another photo, her father at a restaurant with the same man, thick envelopes being exchanged across the table. Then another of trucks bearing her family's company logo, parked outside a warehouse the FBI had identified as a drug distribution center. "Isabella." Marcus's voice was softer now, and when she looked up, she saw something that might have been sympathy in his dark eyes. "I know this is hard, but your father isn't just laundering money. He's been expanding operations. The engagement to Richard Morrison? Richard's family owns 3 shipping companies on the East Coast. Your marriage wasn't just about merging legitimate businesses." The words hit her like physical blows. Isabella pressed her palms against the table, fighting the urge to be sick. Everything she'd believed about her life, her family, her future. It was all built on criminal foundations. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Why not just arrest him?" "Because we need more evidence to take down the entire network," Marcus said. "And because—" he hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because I've been watching your family for months, and you're not part of this. You're an innocent caught in the middle of something ugly." Isabella laughed bitterly. "Innocent? I've been living off blood money my entire life. Those charity donations my father makes? That penthouse apartment he bought me for my birthday? It's all dirty. That's not your fault, isn't it?" She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I never asked questions. I never wondered how our business could afford such an extravagant lifestyle when shipping is such a competitive industry. I just accepted the beautiful clothes and the expensive cars because it was easier than thinking too hard about where it all came from." Marcus stood too, moving closer. "You were sheltered, protected from this world. Your father made sure of that." "To keep me compliant," Isabella said, the realization sharp and painful. "To make sure I'd go along with whatever marriage arrangements he made, whatever business deals he needed me to legitimize." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the truth settling between them. Isabella could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, people going about their normal lives while hers crumbled around her. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on you." Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the antiseptic from his bandaged shoulder. "We could put you in witness protection, give you a new identity, a fresh start somewhere your father's associates could never find you." "And my father?" "Goes to prison for a very long time." Isabella closed her eyes. Despite everything, despite the lies and the criminal empire, he was still her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bicycle, who'd held her when she cried over her first heartbreak, who'd been her only family after her mother died. "There's another option," Marcus said quietly. She opened her eyes to find him watching her intently. "You could help us," he continued. "Stay close to your father, feed us information. Help us build the case that brings down not just him, but the entire network. You want me to spy on my own father? I want you to help us stop him before more people get hurt." Isabella stared at the photographs scattered across the table, evidence of a life she'd never known existed. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, and she could hear the first rumble of thunder in the distance. The downtown warehouse reeked of motor oil and rust, shadows dancing across concrete walls as Sophia followed Marcus through a maze of abandoned machinery. Her heels clicked against the floor despite her attempts at stealth, each sound echoing like gunshots in the cavernous space. You sure about this place? She whispered, pulling her jacket tighter against the chill. Marcus nodded grimly, his hand resting on the concealed weapon beneath his leather jacket. My contact insisted on neutral ground. Somewhere your father's people wouldn't think to look. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, meeting in the shadows like criminals when Marcus was supposedly one of the good guys. But after 3 days of careful planning, they'd both realized the lines between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition. A figure emerged from behind a rusted conveyor belt, and Sophia's breath caught. Agent Sarah Chen moved with predatory grace, her dark eyes immediately cataloguing every detail of the scene. She looked younger than Sophia had expected, maybe mid-30s, with an intensity that made Sophia feel exposed and naive. "Blake," Chen said curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. "You've certainly made things complicated." "The situation evolved," Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral. Chen's gaze shifted to Sophia, and she felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Miss Delacroix, you're either very brave or very foolish to be here." "Probably both," Sophia admitted, surprised by her own steadiness. "But I need to understand what my father's really involved in before I make any decisions." "Your father is running one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations on the East Coast," Chen said bluntly. "We have evidence linking Delacroix Holdings to at least 12 offshore accounts used to clean money for drug cartels, human trafficking rings, and arms dealers." The words hit Sophia like physical blows. She'd known it was bad, but hearing the specifics, human trafficking, arms dealers, made her stomach churn. These weren't white-collar crimes with faceless corporate victims. Real people were being hurt. "How long?" she managed to ask. "We've been building the case for 18 months. Marcus has been undercover for 8 of those, getting close to your father's inner circle through the Riverside Serpents connection." Sophia looked at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The dangerous edge she'd found so attractive wasn't just attitude, it was years of training, of living on the razor's edge between two worlds. "How much of it was real?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "The assignment was real. Getting close to you was part of the plan." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Everything that happened after was real." Chen cleared her throat impatiently. "We need to discuss your father's security protocols, Miss Delacroix. Access codes, meeting schedules, trusted associates." "I don't know about any security codes," Sophia said quickly. "Father keeps me out of business matters." "But you have access to the house, his study, his personal files," Chen pressed. "You could get us what we need to move forward with arrests." The weight of what they were asking settled on Sophia's shoulders. They wanted her to betray her father completely, to actively help destroy him. It was one thing to passively provide information, another entirely to become an active participant in his downfall. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "If I help you, what happens to my father, to our employees, to the legitimate parts of the business?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "We're not interested in destroying innocent people. The legitimate holdings would likely be seized temporarily but could be returned after investigation. As for your father," she shrugged, "that depends on his level of cooperation once he's arrested." Marcus stepped closer to Sophia, his presence both comforting and confusing. "You don't have to decide tonight. But Chen's right. We need to move soon. There are indications your father suspects something." "What kind of indications?" Sophia's pulse quickened. "Increased security, changes to his routine, new faces around the house," Marcus explained. "He's getting paranoid, which makes him dangerous." Chen pulled out a secure phone, sliding it across a nearby workbench. "If you decide to help, use this to contact us. But understand, once you cross this line, there's no going back. Your father will never forgive you if he finds out." Sophia stared at the phone as if it were a snake. Such a small device to hold so much power over her future. Pick it up, and she'd be choosing justice over family, principle over loyalty. Leave it, and she'd be choosing willful blindness over truth. "How long do I have?" she asked. 48 hours, Chen said firmly. "After that, we move forward with or without your help." As they prepared to leave separately, Marcus caught Sophia's arm gently. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know, meeting you changed everything for me." She looked into his eyes, seeing the conflict there that matched her own. "For me too," she whispered, then walked away into the night, leaving the phone untouched on the workbench. The morning light filtered through the safe-house windows as Isabella paced the small living room, her designer heels clicking against the worn hardwood floors. Marcus watched her from his position on the couch, his shoulders still bandaged but his posture alert. 3 days had passed since her world imploded, and the weight of her decision pressed down like a physical force. "The warehouse meeting is tonight," she said, turning to face him. "My father expects me there." Marcus set down his coffee cup. "It's too dangerous, Isabella. If he suspects—" "He doesn't." The words came out sharper than intended. "Not yet, but my absence is raising questions." Agent Chen looked up from her laptop in the corner. "We can't risk exposing you. The investigation means nothing if we can't get the evidence you need." Isabella stopped pacing, her hands clenched at her sides. "I know that warehouse. I know my father's patterns. You need me." The truth hung in the air between them. Marcus had spent weeks briefing his team on the Castellano operation, but Isabella possessed something invaluable: intimate knowledge of her father's world, his habits, his blind spots. Marcus stood slowly, favoring his injured shoulder. "If we do this, you follow my lead completely. No improvisation, no heroics." "I'm not the one who took a bullet playing hero," she replied, though her eyes softened as they traced the outline of his bandage beneath his shirt. Chen cleared her throat. "The wire is state-of-the-art, completely undetectable, but you'll only have about a 2-hour window before the battery dies." Isabella nodded, though her stomach churned. Wearing a wire to spy on her own father felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. "What exactly do you need?" "Evidence of the money laundering operation," Marcus said. "Financial records, account numbers, anything that proves the connection between Castellano Industries and the illegal activities." "And if he talks about the murdered accountant?" The question slipped out before Isabella could stop it. Marcus's expression darkened. "Then we finally have him for murder." She closed her eyes, seeing her father's face, not the cold businessman who'd ordered deaths, but the man who'd taught her to ride horses, who'd held her when nightmares woke her as a child. The duality was tearing her apart. "Isabella," Marcus's voice was gentle now. He crossed to her, his hand hovering near her arm before dropping to his side. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "No." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "This ends tonight, one way or another." The hours crawled by as they prepared. Chen briefed Isabella on the wire's operation, while Marcus coordinated with backup teams positioned around the warehouse district. Isabella changed into one of her usual designer dresses, the costume of Vincent Castellano's perfect daughter. As evening approached, Marcus found her standing by the window, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "Every minute." She didn't turn around. "But not about this. About everything else. About who I was before I met you. You were someone trying to live an honest life in a dishonest world." "Was I? Or was I just willfully blind?" She finally faced him. "I knew, Marcus. Deep down, I always knew something was wrong. The late-night phone calls, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, the fear in people's eyes when they looked at my father. I chose not to see it." Marcus stepped closer. "That doesn't make you complicit, doesn't it?" Her voice broke slightly. "How many people suffered while I lived in my tower, planning charity galas and pretending my family's money was clean?" Before Marcus could respond, Chen called from across the room. "Time to get wired up." The process was clinical. Chen taping the tiny recording device beneath Isabella's dress, testing the connection, running through emergency protocols. But when it was over, Isabella felt like she was wearing her own destruction. Marcus walked her to the car, his team maintaining their distance. In the shadows between streetlights, he caught her hand. "If anything goes wrong, it won't. If it does, He continued firmly. You get out. Forget the wire, forget the evidence. You run. She squeezed his fingers. What happens after tonight? When this is over? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to face. Marcus was still an FBI agent. She would still be Vincent Castellano's daughter. The criminal case would tear her family apart, leave her isolated from everything she'd ever known. I don't know, he admitted. Isabella nodded, then rose on her toes to kiss him softly. It tasted like goodbye. I should go, she whispered against his lips. He'll expect me to arrive fashionably late, but not too late. Marcus released her reluctantly. As she slid into the passenger seat of the nondescript sedan, Isabella caught his reflection in the side mirror. He looked like a man watching his world walk into danger. She supposed in a way he was. The rain hammered against the safe house windows as Elena paced the small living room, her designer heels clicking against the worn hardwood. 3 days had passed since Marcus revealed his true identity, and the weight of that knowledge sat heavy in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. His shoulder was healing well, though she noticed he still favored it when he thought she wasn't watching. The domestic gesture felt surreal given the circumstances, an FBI agent serving coffee to the daughter of his primary target. You need to eat something, he said, setting her mug on the scarred coffee table. Pacing won't solve anything. Elena stopped mid-stride, whirling to face him. Won't solve anything? My entire life is a lie, Marcus. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself. Her voice cracked. How am I supposed to process that? The vulnerability in her voice made his chest tighten. Over the past few days, he'd watched her cycle through denial, anger, and heartbreak. Each emotion cut him deeper than the last, because he was the one who'd shattered her world. Tell me about the night your mother died, he said quietly, settling onto the couch. Elena's face went pale. What does that have to do with anything? You were 12. It was ruled a car accident, but there were inconsistencies in the police report. Your father made several large cash transfers in the days following her death. Stop. The word came out as barely a whisper. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Elena, I think you know more than you've let yourself remember. The way you flinch whenever your father raises his voice. How you've spent your whole life trying to be perfect for him. She was going to leave him. The confession burst out of her like a dam breaking. Elena's hands trembled as she pressed them to her temples. I heard them fighting that night. She said she couldn't live with what he'd become, that she was going to take me and disappear. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the break they'd been looking for, potential evidence that Vincent Romano had murdered his own wife. But looking at Elena's devastated expression, all he felt was the overwhelming urge to protect her from the truth. The next morning, she was dead, Elena continued, her voice hollow. Daddy held me while I cried and told me it was God's will. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. She looked up at Marcus with tear-filled eyes. What kind of daughter does that make me? It makes you human, Marcus said fiercely, rising to close the distance between them. You were a child who lost her mother. Of course you wanted to believe your father wasn't responsible. Elena's composure finally cracked completely. The sobs came in waves, years of suppressed grief and fear pouring out. Marcus caught her as she collapsed against his chest, his arms wrapping around her instinctively. I can't do this, she whispered against his shirt. I can't testify against him. He's all I have left. Marcus stroked her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. You have me. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully address. Elena pulled back to look at him, searching his face. Do I? When this is over, when you've arrested my father and dismantled his organization, what happens to us? Do you disappear back to whatever life you had before you became Jake Martinez? The question hit him like a physical blow, because he didn't have an answer. His assignment was temporary. His feelings for her an unforeseen complication that violated every professional protocol he'd ever sworn to uphold. I don't know, he admitted. the honesty scraping his throat raw. Before she could respond, his secure phone buzzed. Marcus glanced at the screen, and his blood turned to ice. "We have to go. Now." "What's wrong?" Vincent's men found the first safe house. They're working their way through the list. He was already moving, grabbing the go-bag from the closet. "They'll be here within the hour." Elena's face had gone white again, but this time with a different kind of fear. "How did they find us so quickly?" Marcus froze, a terrible possibility occurring to him. "Elena, have you had any contact with anyone from your old life? Phone calls, emails, anything?" "No, I swear." She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The charity gala. I RSVP'd before everything happened. It's tonight. If Daddy thinks I'm just hiding because I'm embarrassed about running away from the engagement meeting, he'd expect you to show up," Marcus finished grimly. "Which means he's probably watching every entrance to that hotel." Thunder crashed overhead as they stared at each other, both realizing the same thing. There was only one way out of this trap, and it would require Elena to walk straight into the heart of her father's world. The safe house felt smaller each day, its beige walls pressing closer as Isabella paced between the kitchen and living room for the 100th time. 3 weeks of hiding had stripped away her usual composure, leaving her restless and sharp-edged. Marcus sat at the dining table, files spread before him like battle plans, his phone pressed to his ear in another hushed conversation with his handler. "No, I understand the timeline," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "But pushing her testimony forward isn't—" He caught Isabella's eye and lowered his voice further. "We'll discuss this later." Isabella stopped pacing. "What timeline?" Marcus ended the call and rubbed his temples. The past weeks had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usually perfect stubble had grown uneven. "The Bureau wants to move up the grand jury testimony. They're concerned your father's people are getting too close to finding us." "How close?" The question came out steadier than she felt. "Close enough that we might need to relocate again." Isabella sank into the chair across from him, studying the photographs scattered across the table. Her father's face stared up at her from surveillance shots, entering restaurants, shaking hands with men she'd never seen, accepting briefcases in parking garages. The Richard Ashworth in these images looked nothing like the man who'd taught her to ride horses and read her bedtime stories. "There's something else," Marcus said, his fingers drumming against the table. "We intercepted communications between your father and Vincent Torino." Isabella's blood chilled. She knew that name. Everyone in their world did. Vincent Torino didn't just break legs or launder money. He eliminated problems permanently. "He's hired Torino to find me," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded grimly. "The contract went out yesterday. $500,000 for your location, double if you're brought back alive." The number hit her like a physical blow. Her own father had put a price on her head that would make her every criminal's target from here to Mexico. Isabella pressed her palms against the table, feeling the room tilt slightly. "Hey!" Marcus reached across the space between them, his fingers finding hers. "I won't let anything happen to you." "You can't promise that." She pulled her hands away, anger flaring hot and sudden. "You can't promise me anything, because everything about us has been a lie from the beginning." Marcus flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Not everything." "Really? Which parts were real, Marcus? When you kissed me in that motel room, were you thinking about the case? When you told me you cared about me, was that just another manipulation technique they taught you at Quantico?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think this is easy for me? You think I plan to fall for the daughter of the man I've spent 2 years trying to bring down?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Isabella's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. "I don't know who you are when you're not pretending to be someone else. I'm the same man who held you while you cried about your mother. I'm the same man who—" Marcus stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "My real name is Marcus Chen. I grew up in San Francisco, lost my parents in a car accident when I was 16, lived with my grandmother until I was 18. I became an agent because I wanted to matter, to make a difference. And yes, I was assigned to get close to your family, but what happened between us?" He met her eyes, and she saw raw honesty there. What happened between us was never part of any plan. Isabella felt her anger wavering, replaced by something more dangerous: hope. "Marcus Chen," she repeated softly, testing the weight of his real name. "That's who I am when I'm not wearing a wire or carrying fake identification. That's who I am when I watch you sleep and wonder how I'm going to protect you from all of this." Before Isabella could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "What is it?" "Motion sensors just picked up movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from the North Access Road." Marcus was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments with practiced efficiency. "They found us." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as the reality crashed over her. Her father's people, maybe Torino himself, were minutes away from breaking down their door. The safe house had become a trap. "There's a service road that leads to the highway," Marcus said, strapping on his shoulder holster. "If we leave now, we might—" The sound of car doors slamming cut through the night air. Isabella counted at least 6 distinct sounds, maybe more. Marcus handed her a small pistol. "Do you remember what I taught you?" Isabella nodded, surprised by her own steadiness as she checked the weapon's safety. 3 weeks ago she'd never held a gun. Now she was preparing to use one against her father's men. "Stay behind me," Marcus said. "And Isabella, whatever happens next, I need you to know I love you. Not the case, not the assignment. You." The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Isabella sat at the kitchen table, her father's encrypted files spread before her like tarot cards predicting doom. Each document she'd decoded revealed another layer of corruption. Money laundering through their pharmaceutical companies, bribes to federal judges, connections to drug cartels that made her stomach turn. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, his shoulder still bandaged but moving more freely. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. He'd been working the phones all night, coordinating with his FBI handlers while she dove deeper into her family's sins. "Any word from Agent Torres?" Isabella asked, not looking up from a particularly damning spreadsheet that showed payments to officials in 3 different countries. "He's mobilizing teams in New York and Miami. With what you've given us, they can move simultaneously on all the major operations." Marcus poured coffee with his good arm, setting a mug beside her. "Isabella, you don't have to keep reading those. You've already given us enough to destroy my family completely." She finally met his gaze. "I need to know exactly what I'm doing, Marcus. Every detail, every crime, every life they've ruined." He sat across from her, and she noticed how carefully he kept his distance now. Ever since their kiss 2 days ago, before they'd learned about her cousin Vincent's murder, before the final pieces of her father's empire had fallen into place, there had been this careful space between them, as if they both understood that whatever was growing between them existed in a bubble that would burst the moment the FBI moved. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Torres found out why your father was so desperate to get you married quickly. The Volkov family wasn't just offering an alliance, they were offering an escape route. New identities, safe passage to Eastern Europe." Isabella's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "He was planning to run? Your engagement party was supposed to be cover. While everyone was celebrating, he would have disappeared with the liquid assets, left the rest of the organization to burn." Marcus's voice was gentle, but the words hit like physical blows. "He wasn't planning to take you with him, Isabella. The marriage would have been your prison." She set down the mug with trembling hands. All those years of preparation, of being molded into the perfect mafia princess, and her father had been planning to abandon her like a chess piece that had served its purpose. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "We suspected when we intercepted communications about the engagement timeline. Confirmed it yesterday." Marcus reached across the table but stopped short of touching her hand. "I'm sorry." A bitter laugh escaped her throat. "Sorry that my father is exactly the monster you always knew he was? Or sorry that I was stupid enough to think family meant something to him. Sorry that you're losing everything because of me." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. She studied his face. This man who had infiltrated her world, who had lied about everything except the way he looked at her, who was about to bring down the only life she'd ever known. "You think this is about you?" she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Marcus, my father killed Vincent, my cousin, who I grew up with, who taught me to ride horses and sneak extra dessert at family dinners. He killed him because Vincent found out about the escape plan and threatened to expose it." She stood abruptly, needing distance from the weight of his guilt. "So don't you dare take responsibility for my choices. I'm not helping you because you seduced me or manipulated me. I'm doing this because it's right." Marcus rose too, and suddenly they were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the soap he'd used that morning and after. "When the trials start, when the media circus begins, when you have to testify against your own father, I'll figure it out." The words came out steadier than she felt. "Isabella," her name was barely a whisper on his lips. "When this is over, when I'm no longer Agent Marcus Rivera, but just me, will there be anything left of us to figure out?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross, because the truth was too complicated, too painful to voice, that everything between them had been built on lies and adrenaline and the strange intimacy of shared secrets. Instead of answering, she picked up her phone and dialed Agent Torres's number. "This is Isabella Romano," she said when he answered. "I'm ready to wear the wire." She felt Marcus's sharp intake of breath, but kept her eyes fixed on the window where dawn was finally breaking. Today, she would see her father one last time before destroying his world. And maybe, in the wreckage of everything she'd ever known, she'd discover who Isabella Romano really was when she wasn't defined by her family's crimes. The warehouse smelled of rust and old motor oil, its cavernous space broken only by shafts of dusty sunlight streaming through grimy windows. Isabella's heels clicked against the concrete as she followed Marcus deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd insisted on coming, despite his protests, despite the danger. The recording device felt heavy in her purse, a constant reminder of the line she was about to cross. "Your father's early," Marcus murmured, checking his watch. Through the windows, they could see black sedans pulling into the lot outside. "This isn't how we planned it." Isabella pressed herself against a concrete pillar, watching as familiar figures emerged from the vehicles. Her father moved with his usual commanding presence, flanked by Vincent and two men she didn't recognize. The sight of him made her stomach clench with a mixture of love and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm her. "I can still get you out of here," Marcus said quietly, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "You don't have to do this." She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his touch. "Yes, I do. This is my choice." The warehouse doors groaned open, and Isabella held her breath as her father's voice echoed through the space. She'd heard that tone countless times growing up, authoritative, calculating, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Now it sent chills down her spine. "The shipment from Miami arrives tonight," Richard Sinclair was saying as the group moved toward the center of the warehouse. "Distribution routes need to be established before the weekend. I won't tolerate any delays like last time." Isabella fumbled for her phone, starting the recording app with trembling fingers. Each word felt like a nail in her father's coffin, each admission another piece of evidence that would tear her family apart. Beside her, Marcus was tense as a coiled spring, his FBI training evident in the way he tracked every movement, every exit. "What about the heat from the Nakamura situation?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying clearly in the empty space. "Word is the feds are sniffing around." Her father's laugh was cold and familiar. "Let them sniff. They have nothing concrete, and they never will. I've been careful for 20 years. I'm not about to get sloppy now." Isabella bit back a sob. 20 years, her entire life built on lies and blood money. She thought of charity galas and private schools, of everything she'd believed about her family's legitimate business empire. It had all been a facade. "Sir," one of the unknown men spoke up. "There's been talk about a leak. Someone close to the operation." The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isabella felt Marcus go rigid beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Through the gap between pillars, she watched her father's expression darken with a fury she'd rarely seen. "A leak," Richard repeated slowly. "How close?" "Close enough to know about the Miami connection, close enough to have details about our offshore accounts." Isabella's blood turned to ice. Marcus had mentioned those accounts during one of their conversations, information he'd gathered during his investigation. If her father connected the dots, Isabella. Her father's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade, and for a terrifying moment she thought he'd spotted their hiding place. But he was speaking to Vincent, pulling out his phone. "Call my daughter. I want to know where she is, who she's been talking to. If there's a leak in my organization, I need to know it doesn't trace back to my family." Vincent's phone rang somewhere in the warehouse, and Isabella's own device buzzed against her palm. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. She quickly silenced it, but the damage was done. Her father's eyes were scanning the warehouse now, suspicious and alert. Marcus made a quick gesture. Time to go. But as they started to move toward the rear exit, footsteps echoed from that direction too. They were surrounded. "Check the perimeter," Richard ordered, his voice sharp with paranoia. "If someone's here, I want them found." Isabella's mind raced. In minutes they'd be discovered. The recording would be worthless if they were dead, and she had no doubt about what her father would do to protect his empire. She'd seen that cold calculation in his eyes, the same look he wore during particularly ruthless business negotiations. Marcus was reaching for his radio, likely calling for backup, but Isabella knew it wouldn't arrive in time. The walls were closing in, and the father she'd loved and admired her entire life was orchestrating their potential destruction. As flashlight beams began sweeping the warehouse and footsteps grew closer, Isabella realized she was about to discover exactly how far Richard Sinclair would go to protect his secrets, even if it meant destroying his own daughter in the process. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Isabella crept through the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every footstep echoed despite her attempts at silence, and she clutched the flash drive containing Marcus's evidence so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The plan was simple: get in, plant the drive in her father's office computer, and get out before anyone noticed she'd ever been there. But nothing about her life had been simple since the night she'd found Marcus bleeding on that rain-soaked street. The familiar scent of her father's cologne hit her before she saw him. Isabella froze, pressing herself against a shipping container as Vincent Castellano emerged from the office, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it takes. Find him." Her father's voice carried across the empty space, cold and lethal. "Marcus Kane has caused enough problems. When you do find him, make it clean. No witnesses." The phone snapped shut, and Isabella bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. She watched her father disappear through another exit, his footsteps fading into the night. Only then did she dare to breathe again. The office door stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Isabella forced herself to move, each step feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd been raised to believe. Family first, family always. The mantras that had shaped her entire existence now felt like chains around her throat. She slipped behind her father's mahogany desk, the same one where he'd taught her to play chess when she was 7, where he'd helped her with homework and listened to her dreams of traveling the world. Her hands trembled as she powered up his computer, the blue glow illuminating family photos that now felt like evidence of a lie. The flash drive slid into the USB port with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence. As files began transferring, Isabella noticed a manila folder labeled with today's date. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Photographs spilled across the desk, Surveillance shots of Marcus entering various locations, detailed reports of his movements, and a background dossier that made her stomach lurch. They knew. Her father had known Marcus was FBI from the beginning, had been feeding him information, playing him like a puppet on strings. But it was the final page that stopped her heart entirely. A contract with a hitman, Marcus's photo paperclipped to the corner, the word "terminated" stamped in red across his face. "Curious as always, my dear daughter." Isabella spun around to find her father standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Behind him, 2 of his men blocked the exit. "Papa, I can explain." "Can you?" Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door with deliberate precision. "Can you explain why you're in my private office after hours? Can you explain why my security cameras caught you meeting with Agent Kane in the park yesterday? Or perhaps you'd like to explain this." He gestured to the computer screen where the file transfer was nearly complete. Isabella's throat closed as she realized there was no talking her way out of this. "You knew," she whispered, "about Marcus being FBI. You knew all along." Vincent's smile held no warmth. "Of course I knew. The moment he showed up bleeding on our street was no accident, Isabella. I've been feeding the FBI just enough information to keep them satisfied while protecting what really matters. But then you had to complicate things. By falling in love with him? By choosing him over your own family." The words came out like a slap. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've risked?" The computer chimed softly, "Transfer complete." Isabella's hand inched toward the flash drive, but her father's voice stopped her cold. "Leave it. I want to see what evidence Agent Kane thought he was so clever to gather." Vincent moved around the desk, and Isabella backed against the window. "Did you really think you could betray me and walk away? I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Vincent's laugh was bitter. "The right thing was standing by your family. The right thing was the marriage to Antonio, the alliance that would have protected us all. Instead, you chose to side with the man trying to destroy everything I've built." Through the window, Isabella caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows outside. Her heart leaped. Marcus had promised he'd be watching, waiting for her signal. But now, with her father's men between her and the door, she wasn't sure any of them would make it out alive. "You're my daughter," Vincent continued, his voice softening with something that might have been regret. "But you forced my hand, Isabella. I can't let sentiment interfere with survival." Isabella's fingers found the emergency beacon Marcus had given her, hidden in her jacket pocket. One press would bring the FBI crashing through those doors. One press would destroy her father forever, but it might be the only thing that saved Marcus's life. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Sophia crept through the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every footstep echoed despite her efforts to move silently. Marcus had been radio silent for 6 hours, and the cryptic text she'd received from his phone, "Warehouse District, Pier 47, come alone," had every instinct screaming danger. She clutched the small recording device in her pocket, the weight of her father's confession burning against her palm. 3 weeks of secretly gathering evidence, of living a double life under her own roof, had led to this moment. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now the one going undercover. The metal door stood ajar, darkness bleeding out like spilled ink. Sophia took a shaky breath and stepped inside. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Her father's voice cut through the gloom, cultured and calm as always. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across stacked crates and shipping containers. Vincent Castellano emerged from behind a pillar, immaculate in his tailored suit, despite the grimy surroundings. "Where is he?" Sophia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Agent Marcus Reed?" Indisposed at the moment, Vincent's smile was arctic, "though I suspect you know him by a different name. How long have you known, sweetheart?" The endearment felt like a slap. "Known what?" "Don't insult my intelligence, Sophia. I raised you better than that." He began walking toward her, slow and predatory. "The question is how long you've been feeding him information about my business." "I haven't." "The Morrison shipment. The warehouse raid last month. the convenient FBI presence at 3 separate operations. Vincent's voice never rose, which somehow made it more terrifying. Either you've been helping him, or I have a mole in my inner circle, and since everyone else has been with me for years, Sophia forced herself to stand straighter. Maybe you're just not as untouchable as you think. Something flickered across her father's face, disappointment perhaps. I had such hopes for you. Even after you ran off and played nurse to a wounded stranger, I thought it was just youthful rebellion. But this? He gestured around the warehouse. This is betrayal. You want to talk about betrayal? The words exploded out of her. You've been lying to me my entire life. I thought you were a businessman, not a what? A criminal? Vincent laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. Sweetheart, every fortune in this city was built on blood and compromise. I just didn't bother with the pretense. Where is Marcus? Agent Reed is learning the consequences of getting too close to his target, a mistake the Bureau will undoubtedly study in their training manuals. Vincent pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. Would you like to see? The video feed showed Marcus tied to a chair in what looked like a shipping container, his face battered but his eyes alert. Sophia's breath caught. Still alive, as you can see. For now. Vincent pocketed the phone. That can continue under certain conditions. What do you want? What any father wants. His daughter's loyalty. His family intact. Vincent's expression softened slightly. This doesn't have to end badly, Sophia. Agent Reed can disappear. A transfer to Alaska, perhaps, or better yet, a career change. These things can be arranged. Sophia felt the recording device digging into her palm through her pocket. One press of a button would start uploading everything to the FBI server Marcus had shown her how to access. Insurance, he'd called it. And if I refuse? Then I'll have lost both my daughter and my business to federal prosecutors. But Agent Reed will have lost considerably more. The threat hung in the air like smoke. You're my father. The words came out broken, pleading. Some part of her still hoped this was elaborate theater, that the man who read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride horses wouldn't actually... Yes, and that means everything to me. But it also means I know exactly what you're capable of, including the device in your pocket. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Vincent smiled at her expression. The warehouse is equipped with signal jammers, naturally, but I appreciate the dramatic gesture. He held out his hand. The recording, please. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the device. Her father's voice confessing to murder, to trafficking, to decades of corruption, all of it useless now. That's my girl. Vincent took the device, dropped it, crushed it under his heel. Now we can discuss your future. And Agent Reed's. The sound of approaching vehicles rumbled through the warehouse walls, multiple engines, moving fast. Vincent's expression darkened. It seems your boyfriend was more prepared than I gave him credit for. Red and blue lights began strobing through the high windows as federal vehicles surrounded the building. Sophia realized Marcus must have been wearing a wire, that his capture had been the trap, not the end game. Her father looked at her with something approaching respect. Clever girl. You're more like me than I thought. The warehouse smelled of rust and stale cigarettes, its cavernous space broken only by stacks of shipping containers and the harsh glare of overhead lights. Isabella's heels echoed against the concrete as she walked between her father and Marcus, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. Somewhere in the shadows ahead, she knew Jake was waiting. You've been quiet, mija, Victor Castellano observed, his voice carrying that familiar note of paternal concern that now felt like a blade against her throat. Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement with the Morettis? She forced herself to meet his eyes, those dark orbs that had once represented safety and unconditional love. Just nervous, Papa. It's a big step. Marcus squeezed her hand, his palm damp with perspiration. Don't worry, Isabella. Once this business with your father is concluded, we can focus on our future together. The irony, wasn't lost on her. Marcus believed he was about to witness a routine arms deal that would cement his alliance with the Castellano family. He had no idea he was walking into the culmination of a 3-year FBI investigation, or that his bride-to-be had helped orchestrate his downfall. The sound of footsteps emerged from behind a stack of containers, and Jake stepped into the light. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket, playing his role as arms dealer to perfection. But Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes quickly swept the warehouse for exits and threats. When his gaze found hers, something flickered across his features, a moment of vulnerability that made her chest tighten. "Castellano," Jake said, extending his hand to her father. "Right on time." "Punctuality is a virtue in our business," Victor replied, studying Jake with the calculating stare that had made lesser men confess their sins. "I trust you've brought what we discussed?" Jake nodded toward the containers behind him. Military grade, untraceable. Enough firepower to outfit a small army. He paused, his attention shifting to Marcus. "Though I wasn't expecting additional company." "My future son-in-law," Victor explained with obvious pride. "Marcus Moretti. He's eager to learn the family business." Isabella watched the exchange like a tennis match, knowing that with each word, the trap grew tighter. The FBI would have everything on tape, the transaction, the participants, the explicit discussion of illegal weapons. Her father's empire would crumble, and she was the architect of its destruction. "The payment," Jake said, keeping his voice steady and professional. Victor gestured, and 2 of his men stepped forward with metal briefcases. As they moved to complete the exchange, Isabella felt time slow to a crawl. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "Actually," Marcus interjected suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "before we conclude our business, there's something we need to discuss." Everyone froze. Isabella felt ice water flood her veins as Marcus stepped forward, a gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Did you really think I was that naive?" Marcus continued, his boyish features twisting into something cold and predatory. 3 years of surveillance, and the FBI thinks they can just waltz in here and destroy what my family has built? Jake's hand moved toward his weapon, but Marcus was faster, swinging his gun toward Isabella. "I wouldn't, Agent Sullivan, unless you want to see your girlfriend's brains decorating this lovely warehouse." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. Marcus knew. Somehow, he had discovered the truth about Jake, about the investigation, about her betrayal. Her father's face had gone ashen, his eyes darting between his daughter and the man he'd trusted with her future. "Marcus," Victor said slowly, "what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, old man, is that your daughter has been feeding information to the FBI for weeks. Your precious Isabella has been playing house with Agent Sullivan here, telling him everything about your operations." The words hit Victor like physical blows. Isabella watched 20 years of love and trust drain from her father's face, replaced by something that looked like death. "Isabella?" he whispered, his voice breaking on her name. She met his gaze, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't deny it, couldn't deny it. "Papa, I—" "How touching," Marcus sneered. "A family reunion. Unfortunately, none of you will be walking out of here tonight." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Jake dove for cover behind a container as gunfire exploded around them. Victor's men scattered, shouting orders in Spanish and English. Isabella felt hands grab her, pulling her down behind a shipping crate as bullets sparked off metal and concrete. Through the madness, she heard her father's voice calling her name, desperate and pleading. She had made her choice weeks ago in that hotel room, but now, surrounded by violence and betrayal, she wondered if love was worth destroying everything she had ever known. The final reckoning had begun. The federal courthouse steps gleamed wet in the morning rain as Isabella walked toward the imposing granite building, her heels clicking against the stone with each deliberate step. 6 months had passed since that night in the warehouse, 6 months since her world had crumbled and rebuilt itself into something unrecognizable, yet somehow more honest. She paused at the entrance, watching through the glass doors as reporters clustered around the metal detectors inside. Today was the final day of her father's trial, the day the jury would deliver their verdict on charges ranging from racketeering to money laundering to conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence had been overwhelming. Marcus had done his job well. A familiar motorcycle rumble made her turn. Marcus pulled up to the curb, removing his helmet to reveal the same piercing blue eyes that had haunted her dreams and given her strength in equal measure. The scar along his jaw had faded but never disappeared, a permanent reminder of the night their two worlds collided. "You don't have to go in there," he said, walking to her side. His hand found hers naturally, fingers intertwining with the ease of practice. "Whatever happens today, it doesn't change anything between us." Isabella squeezed his hand, drawing comfort from his warmth. "He's still my father. I need to see this through." They'd had this conversation countless times over the past months. Through the chaos of the FBI raids, the media frenzy when their relationship became public, the death threats from her father's former associates, and the slow, painful process of untangling her life from the criminal empire she'd unknowingly benefited from for 24 years. Marcus had never once pressured her, never made her choose between him and her family. That choice had been hers alone. Inside the courtroom, Isabella took her usual seat in the gallery. Her mother sat 3 rows ahead, flanked by lawyers, her once pristine facade cracked but not broken. Margaret Sinclair had maintained her husband's innocence throughout the trial, even as witness after witness detailed his crimes. She hadn't spoken to Isabella since the night she'd testified for the prosecution. The jury filed in with solemn faces, and Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged teacher whose eyes held no uncertainty. "On the charge of racketeering in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." The words hit Isabella like physical blows. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. 25 to life without the possibility of parole. Her father's face remained impassive as the judge read the sentence, but Isabella caught the moment his shoulders sagged in defeat. As the bailiff led him away, Victor Sinclair's eyes found his daughter's across the crowded courtroom. For a heartbeat, she saw not the criminal kingpin whose empire had crumbled, but the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had read her bedtime stories, who had kissed her scraped knees when she was small. Then he was gone, disappearing through a side door to begin the rest of his life behind bars. Outside the courthouse, Isabella stood in the rain, letting the droplets wash away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Marcus appeared beside her, shrugging out of his leather jacket to drape it over her shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been the pampered daughter of a wealthy businessman, her biggest worry choosing between designer gowns for charity galas. Now, she lived in a modest apartment downtown, worked at a non-profit helping at-risk youth, and woke up each morning wondering if today would bring another threat from someone seeking revenge against her family name. But she also woke up next to the man she loved, the man who'd shown her that truth, however painful, was worth more than the most beautiful lie. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Good. Because I have something to ask you, and I'd hate for you to be having second thoughts." Before Isabella could respond, he was dropping to one knee on the wet courthouse steps, pulling a simple silver band from his pocket. Around them, cameras flashed as reporters realized what was happening, but Isabella only had eyes for the man kneeling before her. "Isabella Sinclair," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "You're the bravest person I've ever known. You gave up everything for the truth, and somehow found room in your heart to love the man who destroyed your world. Will you marry me?" The ring caught the light as Isabella reached for it, her answer echoing off the courthouse steps and into the rain-washed streets beyond. "Yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Isabella felt the final pieces of her old life fall away. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No lies, no secrets, no looking back. Only truth and love and the uncertain promise of tomorrow.